Susan Dixon is a writer and editor and teacher who studies the effects of haunting memory, the consequences of suppressed secrets, and the healing power of storytelling. She received her bachelor's from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, her master's from George Washington University, and her PhD from Cornell University. Mark M. Smith served 3 years in the Army and rose to the rank of Staff Sergeant, platoon leader. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, spent 12 months in A Company, 1st of the 5th, Air Cav, 8 months in West Berlin as part of the Berlin Brigade, and 8 more months in C Company, 2nd of the 7th, Air Cav. He was awarded the Bronze Star, the Air Medal, the Combat Infantryman's Badge, 6 campaign stars for the Vietnam Service Medal, and the Presidential Unit Citation.
Mark Smith and I went to high school together in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And when we graduated, he enlisted in the Army. That's what he had wanted to do, and he did it. And I went in a completely different direction, grad school, getting married, children. We reconnected in 2012, and he had had a stroke the year before that affected only his speech. But among the first things that I asked him was, would you like to go back to Vietnam? And he said, I would go back in a minute if I could. And I had just come back from a trip and I had thought, I want to take a group, I want to organize a group. So Lorna said that she'd been talking to a few of you about what it's like to go back to Vietnam after so many years. And this is a little window onto what it was like for Mark. I was standing there with him. I could watch him go through the kind of cognitive changes that he had to make in order to take in what he was seeing. So I have two little passages. He served 2 tours with the 1st Air Cav. The first tour was for the most part in Bending Province on the east, on the coast. And he called it the War in the Villages. And he was in choppers a lot, but he was doing patrols through the villages. That tour ended at the time of the Tet Offensive. And after a few months in Berlin, he decided to go back. And that time he was serving in War Zone C up toward Cambodia. And it was a very, very different war. We never got to War Zone C when we went back, but we were in Binding Province. So this is about the first encounter with a place he remembered in Binding Province. If Mark had felt at home simply by arriving in Vietnam, on the drive north on Route 1, he played host, astounding our guide with his detailed knowledge of sites and place names. At LZ English, we turned off the highway and stopped at a crossroads. Mark produced a black and white photo of himself. A cigarette, there he is on the left, a cigarette dangling from his mouth, standing next to his friend Rolf on a dike between rice paddies, and there in front of us were the very dike and paddies in full color. We recreated the photo while young people rode by on motorbikes and greeted us. Mark looked at them almost bewildered, as though he did not understand what they were doing there, happily waving to us. He was seeing double, his memory and the reality in front of him. A woman in a cafe at the crossroads had seen us arrive. I had noticed her wearing the print pajama-like cotton pants and shirt many Vietnamese women wear for daily work. When we walked back toward the bus and she invited us in for refreshments, she had changed into something more formal, let her hair down and put on earrings. She brought us bottled drinks and we sat and talked about what she remembered and about the ways in which the American government supported the Amerasian kids, the children of American soldiers. Suddenly, Mark got up and walked out. I followed. He could not stay in the present, so he went to look for the past, the ammo dump that had blown up when he was not there. We walked through a little garden of pepper plants, climbing conical brick supports, and he saw it. With no hesitation, he went up to the house to ask permission to explore. It was just a hill now behind the house, but he knew the hill was made up of rubble. On the bus, he kept shaking his head in disbelief. The remains of his memories were still there. It really happened, he said. Throughout the afternoon, he identified the Kajep Mountains and recognized Duster Hill, where he had seen the chopper crash, in spite of the growth of vegetation. We climbed a bank to the rebuilt Bongsan Bridge, where his bunker named Desolation Row had stood. A conductor came out of his little booth to speak to us and then went back to retrieve his hat for pictures. Many years before, Mark had observed the landscape so intently that he could now measure distance, spot landscapes and landmarks, and know where to turn. He loved this country where he had come to fight. He came back to see if it was still there. Then the next passage happened a little later and that same day. Mark deeply wanted to return to Anhua and Ankwang, the site of devastation and horror where his doubts had first been sown in him. In this wish, he had the support of An, our guide, who nevertheless thought the only road, which ran along the east side of the lake, was used by the military and so was closed to civilians. Mark yearned so much to get close that we decided to drive to the west side to at least be within sight. The road got narrower as it approached the shore until we had to stop. Mark took off down a little lane and out onto a dike between rice paddies. It was as close as we could get. Across the lake, we saw only quiet houses and trees, making it difficult for the rest of us to imagine Mark's memories. I made a short explanation and we gathered in a circle with joss sticks lit. Mark carried his out to the water as far as he could go and lifted it toward the village. He and I walked back slowly, looking at flowers along the way, the others spread out ahead of us, until we heard voices calling us to come. 2 former Viet Cong had come out of one of the houses along the path to greet us. The 5 veterans were missing one of ours. The 5 veterans stood for photos, arms around one another's shoulders. The VC typically fought in their own districts, defending their homes and villages, so it was more than likely that they and Mark would have fought each other. This surprise meeting moved Mark profoundly. He felt a kinship with these men, a bond unlike any other, and rather than harboring hatred or resentment, they seemed to feel the same. To shared laughter, An translated what they said. "We are glad we weren't better shots." This meeting marked a shift in Mark. While the other 2 veterans traveling with us clung to the idea that, quote, "the Vietnamese have forgiven us," forgiveness was not a concept that Mark entertained. The way he saw it, he did the job he had come to do so many years before, and meetings like these with the Vietnamese veterans allowed him to see the VC and the NVA had done the same. So long ago, they had been generic enemy, identified only with a slur. Now he felt a kinship with them and admired them. They were patriots, he began to say. Meeting with Vietnamese veterans was always the most meaningful thing for him. And we were talking in our group about the slur on the enemy and how it was necessary in order to keep up the fighting. And I saw in Mark's writing that he had a character arc. He had gone from using a slur to calling them patriots.